The scissors came first, then the razor. Clara sat perfectly still on the kitchen chair because fighting would only make it worse. She watched her hair fall to the stone floor around her feet. Long waves of copper red, the same hair her mother once had, the hair that people in the village used to stop and stare at. Piece by piece, it dropped like autumn leaves. Her stepmother stood behind her with the razor and said, "Thieves must be punished." But here is the thing. Clara had never stolen anything in her life. And her stepmother knew it. So why, when the last of the hair was gone, did the woman lean close to the mirror, look at Clara's bare head, and whisper words that had nothing to do with punishment at all? Words that Clara would not understand until it was almost too late. This is the story of a girl who lost everything, even her hair, and of a duke who rose from his chair one evening, walked across a crowded ballroom, and reached for her bonnet in front of everyone. Stay with me until the end, because nothing in this story is what it seems. The silver spoon was found in Clara's apron pocket on a Tuesday morning. She had not put it there. She knew exactly who had because half an hour earlier her stepsister Beatrice had brushed past her in the narrow hallway, far closer than she needed to, with a small smile playing on her lips. Clara had thought nothing of it at the time. Beatrice was always smiling like that, the way a cat smiles at a bird. But when Agnes, her stepmother, called the whole household into the kitchen and demanded that everyone turn out their pockets, Clara felt the cold weight of the spoon before she even reached into her apron. Her heart dropped like a stone into a well. "Well, well," Agnes said, holding the spoon up to the light. "My grandmother's silver, in the pocket of the girl we feed and clothe out of pure Christian kindness." "I did not take it," Clara said quietly. "You know I did not take it." "I know what I see," Agnes said. Beatrice stood by the window, twisting a golden curl around her finger, watching everything with bright, hungry eyes. Now you must understand how things had come to this. 3 years earlier, this house had been a happy one. Clara's father, a respected gentleman with good land and a good name, had loved her dearly. Clara's mother had died when Clara was only 6, and for many years it had been just the two of them, father and daughter. He used to touch her copper-red hair and say, "You are her all over again. As long as you live, your mother is not truly gone." Then, when Clara was 19, her father married Agnes, a widow from the city, charming in company, cold as January behind closed doors. She came with a daughter, Beatrice, 1 year younger than Clara, golden-haired and pretty and jealous of everything Clara owned, everything Clara was. 2 years later, Clara's father went to bed with a fever on a Sunday and was gone by Thursday. And everything changed before he was even cold in the ground. The will, Agnes announced, left everything in her control until Clara married. And who would marry Clara without a dowry? And what dowry would Agnes provide? None. It was a locked door with no key. Within a month, Clara's fine dresses were put away for safekeeping. Within 2, her bedroom was given to Beatrice because the light was better for Beatrice's complexion, and Clara was moved to the small cold room beside the kitchen where the last housemaid had slept. Within 3 months, there was no more pretending. Clara cooked. Clara scrubbed. Clara carried water and blacked the fireplaces and mended Beatrice's gowns while wearing a gray wool dress that had been patched so many times it was more patch than dress. The servants had been let go one by one, to save money, Agnes said. But the strange thing was, there never seemed to be a shortage of money for Beatrice's new ribbons, or Agnes's wine, or the fine carriage they kept in the stable. Only one thing remained to Clara from her old life, her hair. Long, thick, copper red, falling past her waist when she unpinned it at night. Her mother's hair. Even in a patched gray dress, even with her hands rough from lye soap when Clara walked to the village on market day, people still turned to look. Old women still stopped her and said, "Bless me, child, you are the very image of your dear mother." Agnes hated it. Clara could see it in her eyes every time she looked at her. But hate, Clara thought, was all it was. Simple jealousy because Beatrice's hair, for all its golden color, was thin and lifeless, and no one ever stopped Beatrice in the village square. Clara thought that was all it was. She was wrong, but she would not learn that for some time yet. "Thieves are punished," Agnes said now in the kitchen, still holding the spoon. "In some countries they take a hand. We are not savages, of course." She paused, and something moved behind her eyes, something that had been waiting. "But there must be a punishment, one you will remember, one everyone will see." "Mother," Beatrice said from the window, in a voice like syrup, "you know what they do to thieving girls in the workhouse." The word hung in the air. "Fetch the scissors," Agnes said, "and your father's old razor." Clara did not fight. Perhaps she should have. But she was one young woman in a house with no allies, no money, no family left alive, and Agnes had made it clear, many times, that girls with nowhere to go end up in places far worse than a cold room beside a kitchen. So she sat on the chair. She fixed her eyes on the wall, and she held herself very, very still while the scissors bit through the first thick lock of copper hair, and Beatrice made a small sound behind her that was almost a laugh. It took a long time. The scissors, then the razor, scraping over her scalp while tears ran silently down Clara's face and dropped onto her folded hands. She did not sob. She would not give them that. But she could not stop the tears because with every falling piece of hair she heard her father's voice. "You are her, all over again. As long as you live, your mother is not truly gone." They were cutting her mother away from her. That was what it felt like, the last of her. When it was done, the kitchen floor was covered in red, and Clara's head was bare and white and strange, and she felt the cold air of the room touch her scalp like a shameful secret. Beatrice walked around her in a slow circle, delighted. "Oh," she said, "oh, you look like a plucked goose. You look like a boy, an ugly, ugly boy." Clara said nothing. Agnes said nothing either, which was stranger. Clara raised her eyes and found her stepmother watching her in the small mirror that hung by the kitchen door, not with triumph exactly, with something else, relief, as if a problem had been solved, as if she had been carrying a heavy basket for miles and had finally been allowed to set it down. It made no sense, not for a stolen spoon that was never stolen at all. That evening, while Clara swept her own hair off the floor and fed it into the kitchen fire, because Agnes had ordered every strand of it burned, hoofbeats sounded on the road outside. A rider going fast. Then a hammering at doors down along the lane, voices calling, wheels, excitement moving through the village like wind through a wheat field. Beatrice flew in from the front of the house with her skirts gathered up, shrieking for her mother. "He is coming here. It is true, it is printed. The notice is in the town and there is to be a ball. The Duke of Ashford is opening the great estate. He is looking for a bride, mother, a bride, and every family of standing in the county is invited." Clara stood by the fire with the broom in her hands and the last of her burning hair curling into smoke, and she felt nothing. Dukes and balls belonged to another life, a life that had been buried with her father. Whatever happened at Ashford Hall would happen to other people. But Agnes had gone very still. And then Clara saw something she would think about for a long time afterward. Her stepmother turned slowly and looked at Clara's shaved head, looked at it the way a general looks at a battlefield when the fighting has gone his way. And Agnes smiled, a small, satisfied, frightening smile, and spoke quietly, almost to herself, as if Clara were not standing 3 feet away. "Well," she said, "now no one will know who you are. Not now you have learned your lesson. Not now you will think twice before stealing. Now no one will know who you are." Clara lay awake that night in her narrow bed beside the kitchen, one hand resting on her bare scalp, turning those words over and over in the dark. Who did Agnes think she was? And what, in heaven's name, was her stepmother so afraid of? The invitation arrived 2 days later, on thick cream paper with a wax seal pressed with the Ashford crest, a hawk with spread wings. Beatrice carried it around the house for a full day as if it were a holy relic, reading it aloud at breakfast, at tea, and twice at dinner. His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, requests the pleasure of the company of the family at Ashford Hall for a fortnight of festivities, concluding with the grand ball. A fortnight, 2 entire weeks at the great estate, with dinners and card parties and musical evenings, all leading up to the ball where everyone said the Duke would choose his bride at last. He was young for a Duke, or young enough. 32, unmarried and rich beyond counting. He had been away for years in London and on the continent, and Ashford Hall had stood closed and dark all that time. Now the shutters were open, the chimneys were smoking, and every mother in the county was sharpening her daughter like a knife. "I will need gowns," Beatrice announced. "New ones. 6 at least, mother. I cannot be seen twice in the same silk, and I will need the pearl combs and a new riding habit." Money appeared, as it always did when Beatrice wanted something. Clara sewed late into the nights, hemming and fitting and stitching seed pearls onto sleeves while her fingers ached, and she did the work without complaint, because a strange thing had happened. Agnes had decided Clara was coming with them. Clara had assumed she would be left behind to mind the house. She would have preferred it, but Agnes announced in a voice that allowed no discussion that Clara would attend as Beatrice's lady's maid. "Every girl of consequence will bring one," Agnes said. "We will not look like beggars. You will dress her, carry for her, and keep to the servants' quarters. And you will keep that head covered. God knows what diseases they will suspect if they see you. You will wear the bonnet at all times. At all times. Do you hear me?" The bonnet was an old one, deep-brimmed and gray, the kind worn by strict housekeepers in mourning. It tied firmly beneath the chin, and with the brim pulled low, a person could hardly see Clara's face at all, let alone what was or was not beneath the crown of it. Later, Clara would understand that this was precisely the point, that she was not being brought to Ashford Hall despite the risk of being seen. She was being brought because Agnes did not dare leave her behind, out of sight, where she could not be watched. But on that morning, climbing onto the outside seat of the carriage beside the driver, while Agnes and Beatrice arranged themselves on the cushions within, Clara knew none of that. She only knew that the air smelled of late summer, that her scalp itched beneath the heavy bonnet, and that she was going to see Ashford Hall, which her father had once pointed out to her from a hilltop when she was a little girl, saying it was the grandest house in 3 counties. He had been right about that. The carriage passed through iron gates taller than the house Clara lived in, then rolled up a drive that went on for a mile between old oak trees. And then the hall itself came into view, golden stone glowing in the afternoon sun, windows beyond counting, and Clara, despite everything, felt her breath catch. Carriages crowded the great forecourt. Footmen in dark green livery moved everywhere. Fine families spilled out onto the gravel, daughters in traveling silks, mothers barking at maids, trunks and hat boxes stacked like fortress walls. Clara climbed down, was loaded with Beatrice's dressing case, 2 hat boxes, and a wrapped parcel of gowns almost too large to see over, and was pointed toward the servants' entrance at the side of the house. That was when it happened. She was crossing the edge of the forecourt, behind the line of carriages, when a groom leading 2 horses passed too close. One of the horses tossed its head, the groom shouted, and Clara stepped back quickly out of the way. Her heel caught the base of the stone steps behind her. The dressing case flew from her arms, struck the ground, burst open, and scattered silver-backed brushes and hairpins and glass bottles across the gravel in every direction. "Clumsy fool of a girl," Agnes's voice cracked across the forecourt like a whip. Heads turned. Somewhere a young lady laughed behind a gloved hand. Clara dropped to her knees and began gathering the things with shaking hands. The bonnet brim hid her burning face, and she was grateful for it. She reached for a scattered handful of hairpins, and a pair of polished black boots stopped on the gravel directly in front of her. "Allow me," a voice said. It was a low voice, quiet, the kind that does not need to be raised to be obeyed. The man crouched down, gathered 3 of the glass bottles in one gloved hand, and set them into the open case. Clara kept her head down. She could see only the boots, the dark green traveling coat, the gloves. "Thank you, sir," she murmured in the smallest voice she owned. "It was my own fault." "The horse's fault, I think," the man said. "I saw it." There was a pause. She could feel him looking at her, not at her face, which the bonnet hid, at the bonnet itself. The pause stretched a moment too long, as if something about her had snagged his attention the way a nail snags wool. "You are shaking," he said. "Are you hurt?" "No, sir." Another beat of silence. Then Agnes's voice again, closer now, honey poured over ice. "Your Grace, how good of you, but please do not trouble yourself with the girl. She is forever dropping things. I apologize 1,000 times." "Your Grace." Clara's hands went still above the gravel. The Duke rose to his feet. Clara saw the boots turn. "No trouble, madam," he said, in a voice that was polite and completely without warmth, a different voice entirely from the one he had used a moment before. "See that she has help carrying all that. The steps here are uneven." And he walked away. Clara lifted her head 1 inch, just enough to see the back of him crossing the forecourt. Tall, dark-haired, unhurried, the crowd parting around him, and every young lady within 50 yards suddenly standing straighter. She had just met the Duke of Ashford on her knees in the gravel, and he had picked up Beatrice's scent bottles with his own hands. "Get up," Agnes hissed, all the honey gone. "Get inside. And if you make a spectacle of yourself once more, bonnet or no bonnet, I will send you home on the mail coach with a letter that puts you in the workhouse by Sunday. Do you understand me?" "Yes, madam." The servants' quarters were below and behind the great house, a warren of corridors and steep stairs, loud with the chaos of 30 visiting servants being sorted and assigned. Clara was given a bed in a shared room in the attic, a schedule of Beatrice's dressing hours, and a warning from the visiting valet of some baronet that the Ashford housekeeper ran the house like an admiral runs a ship, and that her name was Mrs. Hodge, and that lateness was the one sin she never forgave. Clara met the admiral herself that evening. She was carrying Beatrice's pressed gown up the back stairs when a woman came around the landing above her, an older woman in black with a white lace cap and a great ring of keys at her waist, moving with the brisk authority of someone who had walked these stairs for 40 years. "Mind the turn, girl, that gown will catch on the rail," the woman said, not unkindly, and reached out to lift the trailing hem clear. "Thank you, ma'am," Clara said and looked up. The lamplight on the landing fell across her face, beneath the brim of the bonnet, only for a second. The ring of keys hit the floor. The crash of it filled the stairwell, iron on stone, and echoed down 2 floors. But Mrs. Hodge did not bend to pick them up. She stood gripping the stair rail with one hand, and her face, which a moment ago had been ruddy and stern, had gone the color of cold ash. She stared at Clara as if the girl had walked up the stairs straight out of a grave. "Ma'am," Clara said, "ma'am, are you unwell?" The housekeeper's lips moved twice before any sound came out. "Forgive me," she whispered. For a moment I thought." She stopped. Her eyes went over Clara's face, feature by feature, and then strangely up to the gray bonnet, and something in her expression flickered, confusion chasing the shock. "No," she said very quietly, as if arguing with herself. "No, it cannot be. She had." She did not finish. She snatched up her keys with hands that were not quite steady, turned, and went up the stairs far faster than a woman of her years should have been able to go, leaving Clara standing alone on the landing with a pressed gown over her arms and her heart beating hard against her ribs. Those were the words the housekeeper had swallowed. She had what? But Clara already knew the answer. She felt it move through her like cold water. It was the same thing the old women in the village always said, "Bless me, child, you are the very image of your dear mother." It was the reason people used to turn and look at her on market days. She had hair like fire. That was what Mrs. Hodge had almost said. Clara stood very still on the landing. Somewhere above her, a door closed sharply. And for the first time, standing in the great silent stairwell of a house she had never set foot in before that day, Clara asked herself the question that would change everything. How could a housekeeper at Ashford Hall, 40 miles from home, look into her face and see her mother in it? Her mother had died 17 years ago. And as far as Clara knew, she had never been here in her life. For 3 days, Clara barely saw daylight. Beatrice required dressing 4 times a day. Morning dress for breakfast, walking dress for the gardens, afternoon dress for tea, and then the long campaign of the evening toilette, which took 2 hours and left Beatrice looking like a golden confection and Clara's fingers cramped from curling irons and buttonhooks. In between, there were gowns to press, hems to mend, gloves to clean, and endless trips up and down the back stairs. And through it all, Beatrice talked. About the Duke, always about the Duke. He looked at me at dinner, twice. Lady Marchwood's daughter tried to sit beside him at the musical evening and he moved to the window, but when I sang, he stayed. Mother says he stayed because of me. He is very grave, you know. He hardly smiles at anyone. That is breeding, that is what true rank looks like, not like that vulgar Hartley girl laughing at everything he says. A duke does not want a laughing wife. He wants elegance. Clara pinned and curled and said, "Yes, miss," in the flat voice of furniture, and privately thought that the Duke had not sounded grave at all when he had knelt on the gravel and said, "The horse's fault, I think." I saw it. He had sounded for those few seconds like an actual human being. She had not seen him since. Servants of visiting families did not see dukes. They saw back stairs and sculleries and the inside of linen cupboards, and that suited Clara well enough. What she could not stop seeing, in quiet moments, was the ash-gray face of Mrs. Hodge on the landing. The housekeeper had avoided her since that night. And it was avoidance, Clara was sure of it. Twice their paths should have crossed in the servants' hall at supper, and twice Mrs. Hodge had turned and found urgent business elsewhere. Once, Clara had felt eyes on her while she ate, and had looked up to find the housekeeper watching her from the doorway with an expression Clara could not read at all, grief and fear and something almost like hunger, and then the doorway was empty. Clara told no one. Who was there to tell? On the 3rd night, Beatrice kept her late. There had been a card party, and Beatrice came up flushed with triumph because the Duke had partnered her at whist for 1 entire rubber, and she needed her hair brushed, and her gown hung, and her gloves buttoned away, and her triumph described 3 times over. By the time Clara finally climbed toward the attic, the great house had gone quiet, and the clocks were striking 1:30. She was crossing the landing on the 2nd floor, candle in hand, when she found the way blocked. 2 footmen were maneuvering an enormous wardrobe out of a guest room, the corridor entirely filled with it, and one of them, sweating, jerked his chin toward a door standing open across the way. "Go through the long gallery, girl, and down the far stairs, unless you mean to stand there all night." Clara went through the door and stopped. The long gallery of Ashford Hall ran the length of the west wing, and moonlight came through the tall windows in great silver panels across the floor. On the inner wall, stretching away into the dark, hung the portraits. Generations of them. Men in armor, men in velvet, women in ruffs and women in silk, children with dogs and dead pheasants, all of them watching her pass with the flat, patient eyes of the painted dead. Clara walked quickly, her candle making the gilt frames glimmer, her footsteps very loud in the silence. She did not belong here, and every portrait seemed to know it. She was more than halfway down the gallery when her candlelight passed across a frame, and a color caught the corner of her eye. Copper red. She stopped. She did not decide to stop. Her feet simply stopped all on their own. She raised the candle. The portrait was more recent than its neighbors, the paint still bright. It showed two young women in a garden sitting close together on a stone bench with roses behind them. One was dark-haired, elegant, with a serious mouth and kind eyes, and she wore fine silk and pearls, clearly a lady of the house. The other sat beside her, dressed more simply but not poorly, and she was laughing, caught by the painter mid-laugh in a way that made the picture seem alive, and her hair fell over her shoulder in a thick, shining, unmistakable rope of copper red. The two women were holding hands. Clara stood in the cold gallery and could not breathe. She knew that face. She knew it from a small oval miniature that her father had kept on his desk until the day he died, the one thing of her mother's that Agnes had not managed to sell or hide, because Clara had taken it the night of the funeral and kept it sewn inside the hem of her gray dress ever since. She knew that face the way she knew her own, because it very nearly was her own. The old women in the village had been right all these years. Her mother, sitting in a rose garden at Ashford Hall, laughing, holding hands with a great lady 25 years ago or more. "Mama," Clara whispered to the empty gallery, and her voice cracked on the word. Her mother had never spoken of this place. Her father had never spoken of it. Pointing at Ashford Hall from the hilltop, the grandest house in 3 counties, sweetheart, he had said it the way you speak of a palace in a story, a place with no connection to your own life at all. Why? Why would no one have told her that her mother had sat in these gardens, had been painted on this wall, had held hands with? With whom? Clara stepped closer, lifting the candle toward the dark-haired lady, and that was when she heard the footsteps. Boots unhurried, coming down the gallery behind her. She turned, and the candle flame swayed, and the Duke of Ashford walked out of the darkness into its light. He was in his shirt-sleeves, his cravat loosened, a book hanging from one hand, a man who had been reading late in his own house and had seen candlelight moving where no candlelight should be. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes went from her to the portrait and back to her, and something in his face sharpened. Clara dropped into a curtsy so fast she nearly guttered the candle. "Forgive me, Your Grace. The corridor was blocked. The footman said to come through. I lost my way." "It is 1:30 in the morning," he said. "My mistress was late to bed, Your Grace." Silence. She kept her eyes down, on the moonlit floor, on his boots, the same boots that had stopped in front of her on the gravel. Her heart was hitting her ribs so hard she thought he must be able to hear it. He did not tell her to go. Instead, his boots moved, and she felt him come to stand beside her, facing the portrait. For a long moment he said nothing at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. The coldness was gone out of it, and what was underneath was quiet and strange. "You were looking at this picture." The candlelight caught it, Your Grace. I meant nothing by it." "Most people walk past it," he said. "It is not large and it is not important. 200 years of Ashfords on this wall and you stopped at this one." He paused. "Why?" "Careful," said a voice inside Clara, and it was strange because it sounded like Agnes's voice, hissing on the forecourt. "Bonnet or no bonnet. The workhouse by Sunday." But underneath that voice there was another, older instinct, something animal and wordless, the thing that makes a creature go still in tall grass. She did not understand it. She only obeyed it. "The lady's hair, Your Grace," she said. "The red, it is an uncommon color. It caught my eye, that is all." "Yes," the Duke said slowly, "it is an uncommon color." He turned his head, and she felt him look at her, at the deep gray bonnet, at the shadow where her face was. When he spoke again, His voice was very quiet. "Do you know this woman?" The question stood in the dark gallery between them like a third person. And Clara, staring at her mother's laughing painted face, with her mother's miniature sewn into the hem of the dress she was wearing at that very moment, heard herself say, "No, Your Grace. I have never seen her before in my life." The lie came out smooth and small and steady, and she did not know why she told it, only that every nerve in her body had insisted on it, the way you snatch your hand from a flame before you have even felt the heat. The Duke looked at her a moment longer. Then he nodded once and stepped back, and the coldness came down over his voice again like a shudder. "The far stairs are through the second door. Take a footman's route in future. Good night." "Good night, Your Grace." She curtsied and went, forcing herself to walk and not run, her candle shaking light across the frames. At the gallery door she could not help it. She looked back. He was still standing in front of the portrait, in the moonlight, perfectly still, looking up at the two painted women as if they might speak. Clara slipped through the door, and it was only there in the last reach of her candlelight that she saw what she had been too shaken to notice on the small brass plate fixed to the frame's lower edge as she passed. She had read it in a glance without taking it in, and now it surfaced and stopped her cold on the stair. The plate was engraved with two names, one for each lady. The first said, Lady Catherine Ashford. The second name, her mother's side, the laughing side, was there too, but someone had taken a blade to it. The brass was scored through with deep, deliberate scratches, gouged over and over until the letters beneath were almost gone. Almost, because whoever had done it had missed the first three letters, and those three letters, tiny and bright in the candlelight, were burned into Clara's eyes now as she stood alone in the dark stairwell of a strange great house. R.O.S. Her mother's name had been Rosalind. Nathaniel Ashford had not wanted a ball. He had not wanted a fortnight of festivities, or card parties, or 30 families of the county installed in his house, with their daughters polished and aimed at him like small cannons. What he wanted, what he had wanted for 6 years, was to keep a promise. That night after the gallery, he did not go back to bed. He went to his study, lit the lamp, unlocked the lowest drawer of his desk, and took out a letter he had read so many times the folds had gone soft as cloth. His mother had written it in her last month, when her hands had begun to fail her, so the lines wandered like a tired traveler. "My dearest Nathaniel, when you read this I shall be gone, and there is a thing I have left undone, and I am ashamed of it, and you are the only one I can trust to finish it. Many years ago I had a friend. She was dearer to me than any sister. Your grandfather considered her beneath this family, and your father, God forgive him, agreed, and there was a quarrel and a wrong was done to her in this house. A great wrong, Nathaniel. She left us and she married a good man far away, and I was forbidden to write to her, and I obeyed. I obeyed for years. That obedience is the sin I carry. When word reached me at last, it was word of her death. She left a daughter. My friend wrote to me once, only once, before the end, and I have kept what she sent me, and it is locked away with the rest where your father put it. The child will be a grown woman now. Find her, Nathaniel. What is in this house belongs to her. She has a claim on us that I will answer for before God. I never saw the daughter. I know only what my friend wrote, that the girl is the image of her mother. And her mother, my Rosalind, had hair like autumn fire. You saw it once, though you will not remember. You were 4 years old, and she carried you around the rose garden on her back, and you cried when she left. Find her, right this wrong, and forgive your father if you can. I could not. 6 years. 6 years since his mother's burial, and the promise sat on him still, heavier every season. He had tried. God knew he had tried, but he had begun with almost nothing. His mother, careful even in death, had named no surnames, no towns, as if she feared the letter falling into the wrong hands, and perhaps she had reason to. His father in his final years had been thorough. Account books from those decades gone. Correspondence burned. The staff from that era pensioned off and scattered, and the ones Nathaniel had traced were dead or ancient or would not speak of it. Whatever the great wrong was, his father had spent real effort erasing the road that led back to it. The name Rosalind, and hair like autumn fire, and a portrait in the long gallery with the second name gouged off the plate. That was his entire inheritance of truth. And the locked box. It sat in the wall safe of his father's study, a small iron chest, older than the safe itself, and no key to be found anywhere on this earth. His mother's keys had been buried with her at her own instruction, a detail Nathaniel had learned too late and had never understood. His father's keys opened everything else in the house and nothing about that chest. A locksmith from London had offered to cut it open, and Nathaniel had refused, and could not entirely say why, except that his mother had used the words locked away as if the lock itself were part of the promise, and he was afraid of destroying something in the dark inside. So this spring he had done the last thing left. His solicitor had drawn up lists, every family of standing within a long day's travel of the county where, by one thread of rumor from one dying laundress, Rosalind was said to have married. And Nathaniel had opened the house that had stood shut for years, and let it be known that the Duke of Ashford sought a bride, and invited them all. Every family, every daughter, under his own roof at his own table for a fortnight where he could look at each young woman of the right age, one by one, and search her face for a dead woman he had seen once, at 4 years old, and could not remember. It was a mad plan. It was a cruel plan in its way, and he knew it, because 30 hopeful girls were being paraded before him, and 29 of them, perhaps 30, would go home disappointed for a reason none of them could ever guess. The county thought him proud and cold. The mothers thought him difficult to please. Let them. He was not looking at their silks or listening to their singing. He was looking for fire and finding none. Every shade of gold and brown and black in 3 counties had passed before him at his own dinner table, and not one head of red hair among them, and the fortnight was nearly half gone. And now this. Nathaniel sat in the lamplight with his mother's letter open on the desk, and thought about a serving girl in a deep gray bonnet. He was not a fanciful man. He built his life on things that could be weighed and proven. And what did he have? Nothing that could be weighed. A girl who shook like a leaf on the forecourt while her mistress apologized for her existence, and something in her small, steady voice when she said it was my own fault that had made him want absurdly to say no. None of this is your fault, whoever you are. A girl found at 1:30 in the morning, stopped dead in front of the one portrait in 200 years of Ashford's that mattered, the one portrait he himself stood before more nights than he would admit. The candlelight caught it, your grace, the red, it is an uncommon color. It was nothing, servants got lost, bright colors caught tired eyes, nothing. Except that when he had asked, do you know this woman? The silence before her answer had lasted one breath too long. Except that her no had been too smooth, the practiced no of someone guarding something, and he had spent 6 years listening to people tell him smooth answers about those years, and he knew the sound of a door being quietly closed. Except that she wore that bonnet like a wall. He had seen her 3 times about the house since, always at a distance, always with the brim down, tied tight, indoors and out in the heat of the kitchens and the cool of the halls. He had grown up in a house full of servants. Maids wore caps. White, light, practical. They did not wear deep mourning bonnets at midday over a scrubbed floor. He had noticed it on the forecourt without knowing he was noticing, the way one notices a picture hung crooked, and it had snagged in his mind and stayed there. What color is your hair, he thought, that is all I need, 1 inch of it. He could simply order it, of course. He was the Duke. He could stop her in a corridor tomorrow and tell her to remove the bonnet, and she would have to obey, and he would know in 5 seconds. And if he was wrong, he would be a great lord who had cornered a friendless serving girl and stripped her covering off in his own house for a whim. His father would have done it without a second thought. That was, as far as Nathaniel was concerned, the final argument against. There were better ways, quieter ways. In the morning he would ask the one person at Ashford Hall who had been here through everything, who had known his mother for 40 years, and who, now that he thought on it, had been pale and strange and half absent for 3 days now, ever since the guests arrived, dropping things, forgetting orders, so unlike herself that the cook had asked her twice if she should send for the doctor. Ever since the guests arrived. Nathaniel went very still in his chair. Then he folded his mother's letter, locked it away, and sat for a long time watching the lamp flame, the way a hunter watches a tree line. He found her the next morning in the still room, counting jars of preserves against a ledger, and counting them wrong, because the page trembled faintly in her hand. "Mrs. Hodge." "Your Grace." She turned and curtsied, and her eyes, before 40 years of training shuttered them, flicked with something that looked remarkably like dread. He closed the still-room door behind him. "You have served this house a long time," he said quietly. "You knew my mother better than I did, I think. I have never asked you certain questions out of respect because I believed you would have come to me if you had anything to tell. I am beginning to think that was a mistake. So I will ask you one question now, and I ask it in my mother's name, and I want the truth." The ledger sagged in the housekeeper's hands. She looked at him the way people look at an arriving storm, knowing it has been coming for days, knowing the roof is thin. "The girl in the gray bonnet," Nathaniel said. "The one who came as maid to the Thornfield family. Who is she?" The color drained out of Mrs. Hodges' face so completely, so instantly, that he took a step toward her, afraid she would fall. Her mouth opened. Her lips shaped the beginning of a word. And the still-room door opened behind them. "Oh, Your Grace, forgive me. I was told I might find the housekeeper here." Agnes Thornfield stood in the doorway, all smiles, a shawl over her arm and honey in her voice, and eyes that went from the Duke to the gray-faced housekeeper to the closed distance between them, and understood in one sweep exactly what she had walked into. "I only wished to ask about a cordial for my daughter. She has such a delicate throat before she sings," but I could not help overhearing. "The girl in the gray bonnet, Your Grace. Surely you cannot mean our poor Clara." She laughed, a light, easy, rehearsed laugh, and stepped into the room, placing herself, quite naturally, quite exactly, between the Duke and Mrs. Hodge. "A kitchen girl, Your Grace, taken in by my late husband out of charity and kept on by me out of pity. I would have left her at home, but one cannot get honest help these days. I am sure your own steward says the same. I must apologize if her appearance has disturbed anyone. The truth is a delicate matter, but Your Grace asks so." She lowered her voice to a confiding hush, the voice of a woman bravely sharing an embarrassment. "We had an outbreak of lice in the village this summer. Dreadful. The girl's head had to be shaved to the skin, poor creature, and it has left her quite hideous, and the other servants do talk so. Hence the bonnet, which I insist upon, for everyone's comfort." She smiled. "I do hope she has not been where she ought not to be. I recommend, Your Grace, that no one go near her at all." The still-room was very quiet. "Thank you, madam," the Duke said at last in his coldest, most pleasant voice. "How thorough you are." He bowed precisely and left and did not look back, and so he did not see Agnes turn to Mrs. Hodge, still smiling, and hold the old woman's eyes for one long, silent, freezing moment before sweeping out. But he had seen everything else. He walked the length of the west corridor slowly, hands behind his back, and by the time he reached the gallery door his heart was beating with a hard, bright, terrible hope, because Agnes Thornfield had made in 3 minutes the mistake his father's burned letters had never made. She had answered questions he had not asked. He had said nothing of the shaved head. He had said nothing of lice or hideousness or of anyone going near anyone. You do not build a wall, Nathaniel thought, around an empty field. Shaved to the skin, every strand of it gone, just before the fortnight when every young woman in 3 counties would pass before his eyes. And what color, madam, he thought, standing alone before the portrait of 2 laughing women, looking up at a rope of painted copper falling over a painted shoulder. What color was it before? The trouble with hope, Nathaniel thought over the next 2 days, was that it made a man stupid. He had almost nothing. A scraped brass plate, a housekeeper's gray face, a stepmother's 2 quick answers. What he needed was 1 honest minute with the girl herself, and that minute was proving impossible to get, because Agnes Thornfield had become, overnight, the most attentive guest in the history of house parties. Wherever Nathaniel went, Agnes appeared. If he walked the gardens, she materialized on the path with Beatrice on her arm, praising the roses. If he lingered near the servants' wing, she developed an urgent question about the seating at dinner. And the girl in the gray bonnet had vanished from the visible house entirely. He caught sight of her only once in 2 days, a distant gray figure carrying wash water at dawn, and by the time he had crossed the lawn she was gone, and a smiling Agnes was somehow there instead, remarking on the fineness of the morning. The girl was being hidden, actively, skillfully hidden, and short of ransacking his own attics like a madman, or cornering a terrified maid in front of the county, there was nothing he could do that would not turn Ashford Hall into a scandal and Agnes into a martyr protecting her poor servant from a duke run mad. So he waited and watched and hated it. It was Providence, the cook would say afterward, that did what the duke could not. Providence, and a pan of goose fat left too near the flame. It happened on the 5th evening in the hour before dinner, when the kitchens of Ashford Hall were at full roar. 30 guests upstairs meant chaos below, every stove burning, every spit turning, scullery maids running like soldiers under fire. Clara was there because Beatrice's gown for the evening had needed a pressed sash at the last moment, and the pressing irons lived by the kitchen fire. And so she was standing at the long table with the iron in her hand when the far end of the kitchen went up. She never saw exactly how it started. There was a shout, and a whoosh like a great intake of breath, and then flames were climbing the wall by the second hearth, orange and fast, licking up through the hanging herbs and catching the grease of 100 years of cooking. Smoke rolled across the ceiling in a black wave. Fire, fire. The kitchen emptied like a kicked anthill. Pots dropped, doors slammed open, people fled shouting toward the yard, and in the roaring, smoke-filled confusion, Clara was swept along with the crowd almost to the door. Almost. Because over the roar and the screaming she heard it. Thin, high, and coming from the wrong direction, from inside the smoke. A child crying. Later she would learn the whole of it. That Mrs. Hodges' daughter had died young, and the housekeeper was raising her grandson, little Tom, 6 years old in the way of great houses, half wild, adored below stairs, forever hiding in cupboards and forbidden corners. That evening he had been hiding in the alcove by the second hearth, playing at soldiers behind the flour barrels, exactly where the fire now stood between him and every door. Clara did not know any of that yet. She knew only the sound. She would never afterward be able to explain what she did next, except to say that she did not decide it. Her body decided. She grabbed the great washing tub off the table, sloshing with water, dumped it over her own head and shoulders, dropped to the floor beneath the smoke, and went back in. The heat was a wall. The smoke was a black ceiling coming down. She crawled along the flagstones with her eyes streaming, following the crying, calling out, "Where are you? Shout for me, shout." Here, a small voice cracked with terror, "Here, here." She found him pressed into the alcove with his arms over his head, a small boy with soot on his face, and the flames were in the herbs above the alcove now, dropping burning fragments like terrible snow. Clara pulled him against her chest, wrapped her soaked apron around his head, and ran, bent double, straight through the edge of the fire toward the yard door. She almost made it clean. A shelf above the passage, its bracket burned through, came down as she passed beneath it. It missed the child entirely. It caught Clara across the shoulder and the side of her head, a glancing blow, but enough. Enough to knock her sideways into the doorframe, and enough, as she twisted to shield the boy, to tear the burning edge of a falling sack across her bonnet. She felt the heat at her ear. She felt the ribbon give. Then hands were pulling her through the door into the yard, into the blessed cold air, and the boy was crying and alive and being torn from her arms by a screaming Mrs. Hodge, and Clara went down on her knees on the cobblestones, coughing black, and the burning bonnet fell from her head into the gutter, and there was nothing she could do. The yard was full of people. Kitchen staff, footmen, grooms, stable boys, guest servants, half the house, ringed around in the dusk with the fire glowing in the doorway behind her, and every one of them saw. The coughing girl kneeling on the cobbles in a soaked dress, steam rising off her shoulders, with a child's soot on her hands and her head shaved bare to the skin. The yard went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the fire. Clara knelt there, chest heaving, and felt the cold evening air on her naked scalp like a public shaming, and closed her eyes. She heard the whispers begin, running around the ring of watchers like a lit fuse. She was too spent to weep. She thought with a strange, distant calm, so now it comes. The disgust, the laughter, Beatrice's voice saying plucked goose to a bigger audience than she could ever have dreamed. And then the ring of people shifted, and Boots came through it at a run and stopped. The Duke of Ashford had come down from the house at the first shout of fire, in his evening shirt, coatless, and had been organizing the bucket line at the far side of the yard. And now he stood 10 feet from her, absolutely still, while men shouted around him about pumps and water. Clara opened her eyes and looked up, because there was nothing left to lose, and looked straight into his face. He was not looking at her scalp. That was the thing she saw, kneeling there in the wet and the ash, the thing she would turn over in her mind all that sleepless night. Every other face in that yard was staring at her bare head. His eyes were on her face, on her eyes. And what was in his expression was not disgust, and it was not pity, and it was not even the shock of the others. It was the look of a man straining toward something. The look of someone standing in a doorway of a dark room they knew as a child, waiting for their sight to adjust, certain that the furniture is there, certain, if they only wait one more second. "Your Grace, the pump," someone bellowed. The moment broke. He turned, shouted orders, and the yard exploded into motion again, the bucket line reforming, and someone threw a horse blanket around Clara's shoulders, and Mrs. Hodge was suddenly there, kneeling in front of her with little Tom still clamped in one arm, gripping Clara's blistered hand with her free hand, and the old woman's face was ruined with tears. "God bless you," the housekeeper kept saying in pieces. "God bless you, girl. He is all I have in the world, all I have." The fire was beaten within the hour. It had eaten one hearth wall and a pantry and the evening's dinner, and touched nothing more. The great house stood. By midnight the guests upstairs had turned it into an adventure and a story, dining on cold meats and champagne, and Beatrice, Clara heard, had performed a gratifying feint into the arms of a baronet. Clara was put to bed in the housekeeper's own parlor, over her protests, with salve on her burned hand and a posset she was too tired to drink. Agnes had come to the door of the servants' hall exactly once, looked at Clara wrapped in blankets with her bare head uncovered for all the world, and Clara had watched something furious and afraid move behind her stepmother's smile before Agnes said loudly, for the benefit of the room, that she thanked God the girl was safe, and withdrew. Clara slept like the dead. so she did not hear what happened at 2:30 in the morning, when the corridor outside the housekeeper's rooms creaked, and a soft knock came at Mrs. Hodges' own door. The housekeeper had not been asleep. She opened the door in her shawl with a candle in her hand, and found the Duke of Ashford standing in the servants' corridor of his own house in the middle of the night, still in his smoke-stained shirt, his knuckles raw from the bucket line. For a moment neither of them spoke. "Your Grace," Mrs. Hodge whispered, "the boy is well, he sleeps. If it is about the damage, the assessment can surely wait for." "Margaret," the Duke said. The housekeeper stopped. In 40 years, the masters of this house had called her Hodge, or Mrs. Hodge. Only one person in all that time had ever called her Margaret, and that person was 16 years in the churchyard, and hearing the name now in the son's voice, the old woman's chin began to tremble. "No more," the Duke said quietly. "No more waiting and no more silence, and God forgive me, no more respect for the dead if respecting them means this. I stood in that yard tonight and I looked into that girl's face." His voice, so level all the years she had known him, bent under the strain of keeping quiet. "I have seen those eyes before, Margaret. I was 4 years old and I have seen those eyes in this house, and I think you know exactly where. So you will let me in, and you will sit down and you will tell me the truth. All of it." He stepped forward into the candlelight. Now, Mrs. Hodges' parlor smelled of beeswax and lavender, and the fire had burned down to red coals. The housekeeper sat in her own chair like a prisoner in a dock, her hands wrapped around each other in her lap, and the Duke sat opposite her, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, and waited. The clock on her mantel ticked away a full minute before she found her voice. "I made a promise, Your Grace, to your mother. On her deathbed I promised her silence, and I have kept it 16 years, and I would have carried it to my grave." She raised her head. "But that girl carried my Tom out of the fire tonight. Whatever I owe the dead, I owe her more, and I think, God help me, I think your mother would say the same." She drew a long breath. "Ask me." "The woman in the gallery portrait, the red-haired woman, who was she?" "Miss Rosalind," Mrs. Hodge said, and saying the name aloud after so many years seemed to physically hurt her. "Rosalind Fairweather, as she was then, daughter of a physician, no fortune, no rank. She and your mother met as girls at school and loved each other like sisters from the first week. Your mother brought her here every summer. This house was never so alive before or since. Your mother was the quiet one, the careful one, and Miss Rosalind was the flame. She would sing in the corridors. Your grandfather said she had no breeding. What she had, Your Grace, was more grace in her little finger than—" The housekeeper stopped herself, glancing at the door out of 40 years of habit, then continued more quietly. "You asked about the portrait. Your mother commissioned it in secret, the summer before it all went wrong, and paid for it out of her own pin money." "And the summer it went wrong?" Mrs. Hodges' hands tightened in her lap. "There was a betrothal being arranged. Your mother and your father. It was a match of estates, Your Grace. You know how it was done, and your mother accepted her duty as she accepted everything, quietly. Miss Rosalind was here that summer, and your grandfather and your father accused her before the whole household of theft." The word dropped into the small room like a stone. "Theft," Nathaniel repeated. "Lady Catherine's emeralds. Your grandmother's set, that was to come to your mother on her marriage. They went missing from the Countess's own chamber, and they were found." Her voice shook. "They were found sewn into the lining of Miss Rosalind's traveling trunk. She was given until morning to leave the house, and told that if she ever wrote to your mother, or set foot in the county again, your grandfather would put the matter before the magistrates and see her transported. A physician's daughter against the word of an earl and his son. She left before dawn. I helped her pack. I was a young under-housemaid then, and I held her cloak while she stood in the yard waiting for the carrier's cart in the rain, and Your Grace, she looked at this house, and she was not weeping. She said to me, Margaret, I did not touch them, and one day God will say so out loud." The coals settled in the grate. Did she take them? Nathaniel asked very quietly. Mrs. Hodge looked him in the eye. Your mother went to her grave certain she did not. And I will tell you the thing I have never told a living soul. 2 years after Miss Rosalind was driven out, when your grandfather died and your mother was mistress here at last, she had cause to go through his private strongbox. The housekeeper leaned forward. The emeralds that were found in that trunk, your grace, were paste, copies, good ones. The real stones were in your grandfather's strongbox all along and had never left it. Nathaniel sat back slowly. It was arranged, he said, the whole of it to be rid of her. Your mother confronted your father. I heard them through 2 closed doors. He did not deny it, he defended it. Said she was a scheming nobody who had made herself too dear to his future wife, that his father had done what was needed to protect the family. Your mother never forgave him. You grew up in that cold, your grace, and I dare say you never knew its name. That was its name, Rosalind. And afterward, my mother said in her letter that Rosalind wrote to her once before the end. 16 years ago a letter came. How Miss Rosalind knew she was dying and your mother was dying too, I cannot say, but old friends know things. It came enclosed to me, so your father would not see it, and I carried it up to your mother myself, and there was a packet with it sealed. Your mother read the letter twice, and then she wept in a way I had never seen her weep in her whole life. And then she became very calm, and she sent for the small iron chest that had been her own mother's. She put the letter and the packet inside, and she locked it, and she made me witness where she put the key. Nathaniel went very still. The keys were buried with her, her instruction. 1 ring of keys was buried with her, Mrs. Hodge said. Her household keys, yes, into the coffin, and all the county thought it a strange fancy of a dying lady. That was the point of it, your grace. She wanted it known and repeated everywhere that her keys were in the ground, but the key to the iron chest was never on that ring. The old woman rose stiffly, crossed to the mantel, and took down the plain wooden box that held her sewing things. From beneath the thread papers and the pin cushion she drew a small folded square of oilcloth, worn shiny with 16 years of handling, and Nathaniel realized she must have moved it, checked it, carried it from room to room through all those years, a woman guarding a thing she could tell no one existed. She unfolded the oilcloth with unsteady fingers, and a small dark key lay in her palm. She put it in my hand the week before she died, and she said, Margaret, my husband will look for this. Tell him nothing. My son is too young and too much under his father. Tell him nothing yet. But a day will come when the right person stands in front of you, and you will know them when you see them, and then, and only then. Mrs. Hodge's voice failed, and she pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth and mastered it. Your Grace, 3 nights ago a girl looked up at me on the back stairs, and I dropped my keys because I thought the dead had come back. I have been half mad since, telling myself it could not be, because the hair was gone, and Miss Rosalind was her hair, do you see? In my memory she was, and this poor shaved creature in a servant's bonnet. I told myself I was an old fool seeing ghosts. She held the key out to him across the firelight. Tonight in that yard I saw her face by the light of a burning kitchen, and your Grace, I am not an old fool, and I have never seen a ghost. That is Rosalind's daughter carrying my grandson, or God has made 2 of the same woman. Nathaniel took the key. It weighed nothing, and it weighed everything. Then the chest holds what my mother owed her, he said. We open it in the morning, and then I speak to the girl plainly, alone, and this ends. He stood. What is she called? Her mistress said Clara. Clara what? What was Rosalind's married name? And here the housekeeper's face fell. I never knew it, your Grace. That was the secrecy of it. The letter 16 years ago came under cover, with no direction on it, and your mother burned the outer wrapper in her own grate the same hour. If the name is anywhere, it is inside that chest. Then the girl will tell me herself in the morning, Nathaniel said. 1 question, and she has no reason on earth to lie to me. He was wrong about that, but he could not know it yet. Morning came gray and smelling of wet ash. The house woke late and buzzing, the fire already swollen into legend, and the strangest part of the legend, whispered on every stair, was the serving girl who had gone into the smoke, and what all the yard had seen when her bonnet burned. Nathaniel had given his valet instructions the night before, and by 8 the arrangement was made through Mrs. Hodge, quiet and proper. The girl, recovered enough to walk, would be sent to the housekeeper's parlor at 9 to have her burned hand dressed. The Duke would happen to call in upon the housekeeper at that hour. 10 minutes, 3 witnesses of his own choosing, everything discreet and everything decent. At 9 o'clock Clara sat in the parlor chair with her hand in Mrs. Hodge's lap, wearing a clean cap the housekeeper had pressed on her, and the door opened, and the Duke of Ashford came in, and Clara tried to rise and was told, gently, to remain seated. "I owe you thanks," he said without ceremony. "The boy you brought out of that kitchen is the grandson of the best servant this house has ever had. What you did was the bravest thing I have seen a man or woman do." He paused. "I find I do not even know your name to thank you with, your full name." "Clara, your grace," she said low. "Clara," he repeated, and something in the room tightened, the housekeeper's hands going still on the bandage, the Duke's stillness too deliberate, and Clara felt it without understanding it, felt that this room had been arranged around this moment the way a stage is arranged around a single mark on the floor. "And your mother, Clara? What was your mother's name?" Afterward she would remember the strange slowness of it, how the question seemed to come toward her from a long way off, how her lips parted, how the name rose in her throat, Rosalind. My mother was Rosalind, and she never once thought of lying, not here, not to him, not with the housekeeper's warm hands around her burned one. The parlor door swung open without a knock. "So this is where she is hidden away," Agnes Thornfield said. She came in like weather, silk skirts and outrage, a folded paper in her hand and 2 of the visiting servants hovering behind her in the corridor, summoned as audience. Her eyes swept the little scene. The Duke, the housekeeper, the bandage, and Clara watched her stepmother understand it all in a single beat, and watched the fear behind her face convert itself, smoothly and instantly, into use. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but I am glad beyond words that you are present, for I should want no one to say afterward that this was done in a corner." Her voice rang for the corridor's benefit. "Last night, during the confusion of the fire, my daughter's room was entered. This morning her jewel case was found disturbed, and this girl's pallet was searched." She unfolded the paper wrapping with the flourish of a conjurer, and held up, dangling from her gloved fingers, a brooch. Gold, old-fashioned, set with a ring of small pearls around a miniature painted flower. "Sewn inside her spare apron," Agnes said. "Sewn in, your grace, the practiced trick of a practiced thief. It grieves me to say it is not the first time. She was punished for stealing silver not 1 month ago. We kept her out of Christian charity, but charity has limits, and I will not have my family made victims again under any roof, even this one." Her voice achieved a tremble of injured virtue. "I have sent word to have the cart readied. She returns home today, and from home she goes to the magistrate or the workhouse, whichever will have her, and your grace, I must beg you, let no sentiment over last night's dramatics blind anyone to what this creature is." The room was dead silent. Clara looked at the brooch turning slowly on its pin in the light, a thing she had never seen or touched in her life, and felt the old cold flagstone certainty settle through her. The kitchen chair, the razor, thieves must be punished, the whole machinery closing around her again, and this time in front of him. But the Duke had not moved at all, and he was not looking at Agnes. He was looking at the brooch, and his face had gone white to the lips. Because Nathaniel Ashford had seen that brooch before, every day of his childhood, a ring of small pearls around a painted forget-me-not, pinned at his own mother's collar. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the housekeeper's parlor breathed. Nathaniel stood with his eyes fixed on the brooch swinging from Agnes Thornfield's gloved fingers, and inside him 2 voices were shouting at once. The first voice was a boy's voice, 4 years old, 10 years old, 16, saying that is mother's, that is the forget-me-not she wore at her collar, I would know it in the dark. And the second voice, colder and quicker, the voice of a man who had spent 6 years learning how carefully this woman's kind laid their traps, said very clearly, be silent. Think. Because if he said it aloud, if he said, Madam, that brooch belonged to the late Duchess of Ashford, what followed? He watched it unfold in his mind like a hand of cards. Then the girl has stolen not from her mistress but from Ashford Hall itself. Then it is no longer a family matter of aprons and workhouses. It is the magistrate, it is assizes. It is a friendless servant girl with a shaved head standing in a dock while gentlefolk swear against her. He had no proof of anything yet. The chest was still locked. The name was still unspoken. Agnes Thornfield had walked in 1 minute too early, and if he moved now, clumsily, he would drive the blade in deeper himself. His mother had waited 16 years. He could wait 1 day. So the Duke of Ashford did the hardest thing he had ever done. He unclenched, muscle by muscle, and turned to Agnes with a face of polite, bored, aristocratic distaste and said, How tiresome for you, madam. Agnes blinked. Whatever she had braced for, it was not boredom. Theft in my house during a fire is a serious matter, he went on, in the flat tone of a man discussing drains. It touches my household's honor as well as yours. You will leave the brooch with me. Your Grace, it is my daughter's property and evidence of. Precisely, evidence. He held out his hand, palm open, and it was not a request. If the girl is to be put before a magistrate, the item will be examined properly, and the servants who found it questioned under my roof, where the offense is said to have occurred. Unless, and here he let his voice cool by several degrees, there is some reason, madam, that you would prefer the evidence not be examined. Their eyes met, and Clara, watching from her chair with her bandaged hand forgotten in her lap, saw something extraordinary. She saw her stepmother, the immovable weight that had crushed her life flat for 3 years, hesitate. Then Agnes smiled and laid the brooch in his palm because there was nothing else she could do. Of course, Your Grace, how correct you are, though I confess I cannot think what examination is needed when it was found sewn in her apron before witnesses. Then the examination will be brief. He closed his fingers over the brooch. The gold was warm from her glove, and it took an act of will not to look at it. You spoke of a cart. There is no need to disturb the magistrate today. The girl is injured, the house is disordered from the fire, and I have guests. I will send my own man to wait upon you at Thornfield in 2 days' time to settle the matter properly. 2 days. Time enough to open the chest, to fetch his solicitor from town, to come to Thornfield with truth in one hand and law in the other, and take the girl out of that house forever in broad daylight with no scandal that could touch her. It was the correct move, the careful move, the chess player's move. It was the worst mistake of his life, and he would pay for it within a day. Agnes swept out with her audience of servants trailing her. Clara rose to follow because what else was there, and for 1 moment she passed close to the Duke, close enough that he could have spoken, and their eyes met for the second time, hers exhausted and shamed and dry, his urgent with something he could not say in front of the wrong ears. He said only, quietly, You will not be forgotten, Clara. She did not understand him. How could she? She heard it as the kind thing great men say to unfortunate people on their way to ruin. She made her curtsy and went, and Mrs. Hodge stood in the parlor doorway watching her go down the corridor with her bandaged hand held against her chest, and wept without a sound. The Thornfields left Ashford Hall within the hour. It should have raised eyebrows, a family abandoning the fortnight 3 days before the grand ball, with a daughter in the running for a duke. Agnes managed it with genius. Word went round among the guests before the trunks were even strapped that poor Mrs. Thornfield had suffered a robbery by her own charity case, that the girl was to be dealt with at home as quietly as Christian mercy allowed, and that the family would of course return for the ball itself, Beatrice being far too gentle-hearted to let a servant's wickedness spoil his Grace's festivities. Mothers pressed her hand in sympathy. Somewhere in the retelling it became understood that the shaved head had been punishment for earlier thefts, and the yard's whispered story of the girl who saved the child curdled, by supper time, into the story of the thieving girl who had probably started the fire. Clara rode home the way she had come, on the outside seat in the rain. No one spoke to her at Thornfield that night. She was locked into her room beside the kitchen, and she lay on the narrow bed listening to the murmur of voices above, Agnes's low and hard and continuous, Beatrice's rising now and then in complaint, and she understood with perfect clarity that something had gone wrong in her stepmother's plans, that she, Clara, had somehow become more dangerous to them at Ashford Hall than she had ever been at home, and that whatever came next would come fast. It came at dawn. The bolt rattled and Agnes stood in the doorway, dressed for travel, holding Clara's old carpet bag, already packed, already closed. "Get up, you are leaving." "Leaving?" Clara sat up slowly. "For the magistrate." "For wherever creatures like you go." Agnes threw the bag onto the bed. "Understand me, girl, because I will say this once. There will be no magistrate, no trial where you stand up and tell stories about brooches and great houses. You will simply be gone. You worked here, you stole, you were dismissed without a character. That is the whole of your history, and it is written to every household of consequence in this county by this morning's post." She stepped closer and dropped her voice to the register Clara had learned to fear more than shouting. "The Duke's man comes tomorrow. He will be told you ran in the night like the thief you are and took the silver candlesticks with you, and if you are ever seen within 10 miles of this parish or his, that is the charge that will meet you. Candlesticks before witnesses. They transport girls for less." Clara stood very still in her nightdress in the cold room, and asked the question she had been asking silently for a month, and heard her own voice come out steady. "What is it you think I know?" Something flickered deep in Agnes's eyes. "Walk east," Agnes said. "There is bread in the bag. It is more than you deserve." The rain had set in from the north. By mid-morning Clara was 4 miles down the east road, soaked through the horse blanket she had been allowed to keep, her shorn head wrapped in a kitchen cloth, her burned hand throbbing inside its bandage. She had 2 shillings, sewn long ago into her hem beside her mother's miniature. She had a heel of bread. She had a name that was being poisoned in every great house within a day's ride, faster than she could walk. She walked. There was nothing else to do, so she did it, one flooded rut at a time, while carts sprayed her and the rain came sideways, and somewhere in the gray middle of that day, the thing inside her that had bent and bent and bent for 3 years finally spoke up, quiet and clear, and what it said surprised her. It did not say lie down. It said she is afraid of you. She has always been afraid of you, live long enough to learn why. At dusk, 11 miles out, a village called Marsh Priory. An inn, the Green Man, light in its windows. Clara stood dripping in the doorway of the kitchen yard and asked, not for charity, but for work, any work, one night's floor space, and she would scour every pot in the place. The innkeeper's widow, a square, sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Pettibone, looked her over a long moment, the bandage, the cloth-wrapped head, the ruined shoes, the steady way the girl held her eyes while asking, and said at last, "Pots are through there. Soup's at 9. Mind you eat it." Clara scoured pots until her arms shook, and ate the soup, and slept in the warm behind the kitchen chimney, and for one night that was mercy enough. And 40 miles west, at 10 o'clock that same night, the Duke of Ashford sat alone in his study, having done a thing he had put off through the whole endless day of guests and fire repairs and maddening obligation. The chest would be opened in the morning. His solicitor, sent for by fast rider, would arrive by noon. Everything in order, everything by law. But the brooch he had carried in his breast pocket since morning, and now he took it out at last and laid it on the desk in the lamplight. The forget-me-not, the ring of small pearls, older and more worn than his boyhood memory of it, the gold soft with handling, one pearl gone from its setting, his mother's beyond any doubt. And so his first raging assumption had been that Agnes Thornfield, or her daughter, had somehow stolen it from this house, years ago, some earlier visit, some auction of the estate's effects during the closed years, and had now blundered by planting a stolen Ashford jewel back inside Ashford Hall itself. He turned it over to examine the clasp, and went still. The back of the brooch was not smooth. It carried an engraving worn shallow by decades of wear against cloth, and he tilted it to the lamp and read, in fine old-fashioned script, the words his mother had ordered cut into the gold long before he was born. To my Rosalind, sisters choose each other, Catherine Ashford. Nathaniel sat without moving while the lamp hissed softly, and the whole picture turned over and reassembled itself. And the new picture was worse. The brooch had never been stolen from Ashford Hall. It had left this house openly, on the collar of a laughing red-haired girl, a gift, a vow, sisters choose each other. It had been Rosalind's. It had gone where Rosalind went, into her marriage, into her home, into the keeping of her widowed husband, and then into the hands of whoever came after and picked that dead man's house clean. Which meant Agnes Thornfield had not planted some anonymous trinket on an inconvenient servant. She had reached into a drawer of things she had no right to touch, and chosen, out of all of them, the dead mother's own brooch, and sewn it into the daughter's apron, and called the daughter a thief in front of half a county. She had made only one mistake, and it was the mistake of a woman who had never once, in all her cold inventory of what Rosalind's things were worth, thought to turn a single one of them over and read it. Nathaniel closed his fist around the brooch, and the last doubt in him burned away like paper. "Clara," he said aloud to the empty study, to the portrait wing sleeping above him, to 40 dark miles of rain, "Rosalind's daughter, under my own roof. I asked her to tell me her mother's name, and the door opened, and I let them take her." The chest could wait for no solicitor. He took the lamp and went for Mrs. Hodge and the key. They opened the chest at midnight, in the late Duchess's sitting room, which had stood shrouded and unused for 16 years. It seemed the only fitting place. Mrs. Hodge lit the candles with shaking hands, and Nathaniel set the small iron chest on his mother's writing table and turned the key his mother had hidden inside a sewing box for 16 years. The lock, oiled by no one in all that time, resisted, then gave with a small, clean click that sounded very loud in the dead woman's room. Inside, wrapped in a square of faded blue silk, lay 3 things. The first was a letter, addressed in a swift, warm, imperfect hand, to Catherine, to be given also to my daughter if God is kind. The second was a document, folded thick, sealed, and marked in a different hand, a man's careful lawyer-taught script, Last Will and Testament of Edmund Sinclair, Gentleman of Thornfield, true copy, executed and witnessed. The third, small and heavy at the bottom of the chest, was a ring. A plain gold band, a woman's wedding band, worn thin. Nathaniel read the letter first, standing, by candlelight, with Mrs. Hodge weeping quietly into her apron across the table, and parts of it he read aloud because he could not help it, and parts of it he could not read aloud at all. "My Catherine, if this reaches you, then we are both where the doctors' faces say we are going, and there is no time left for pride, so I will write plainly. I forgave you years ago. Write that first in case my hand fails. There was nothing to forgive. We were girls against old men, and the old men had the law and the money and the county, and we had a rose garden and each other, and I have never once in my life regretted the choosing. I married a good man, I want you to know it. Edmund Sinclair of Thornfield, a gentleman of modest land and immodest heart. He knew every word of what was done to me at Ashford and married me the faster for it. We had one daughter. Catherine, she is you and me both. My stubborn, quiet love, and your no, she is herself, and she is the best of all of us, and her name is Clara. I am sick, and Edmund, God keep him, has lately married again, believing our girl will need a mother. I will not write against his new wife. I will only write this. I have watched her count the spoons when she thinks no one sees, and I have watched her watch my daughter, and I am sending to you, my sister, the true copy of Edmund's will, which he made at my urging, and which names Clara sole heiress of Thornfield and all its lands upon her marriage or her 25th year. The other copy lies with Pettifer and Sons of Gray's Inn, London. Edmund believes me over-careful. Catherine, you and I know what careful is for. If ever my Clara stands in need and I am gone, show her this and the will and my ring, and tell her that her mother was called a thief in a great house once, and walked out with her head high, and that the truth kept its appointment in the end. It always does. It is only sometimes late. Sisters choose each other. Your Rosalind. The candles burned. Mrs. Hodge had given up the apron and simply wept. Nathaniel laid the letter down with more care than he had ever laid anything down in his life, and broke the seal on the will, and read it twice, and the cold that came over him then had nothing of grief in it. It was the cold that comes before action. Sole heiress. Thornfield, its farms, its rents, its house, the whole of it Clara's, held in trust until marriage or 25. Which meant the will that had been proved after Edmund Sinclair's death, the will Agnes ruled by, the will that made a servant of the daughter in her own house, was a forgery or a suppression, and every shilling Agnes Thornfield had spent for 3 years had been stolen, and the woman knew it, had always known it, and had lived every day since in fear of a single question being asked by a single person with the power to ask it. Now no one will know who you are. She did not shave that child's head for a spoon, Nathaniel said quietly. She shaved a name off her. She has been erasing Rosalind's daughter for 3 years, and I invited every family in the county to my house and lit the county on fire under her, and she panicked, and I stood in that parlor yesterday and let her walk out with the girl in her hand. He looked up. Margaret, wake my valet. I want my horse and 2 grooms mounted within the half hour. My compliments to my guests in the morning. The ball is in 3 days, and I regret that urgent business calls me away. My steward will see to their comfort, and I do not care what they think of it. And send a rider now tonight to Pettifer and Sons of Gray's Inn, London. He was at Thornfield by 8 in the morning, mud to the waist, with the law not yet in his hand but the whole truth in his breast pocket, and he was one dawn too late. Agnes received him in the morning room with astonishment and candles of concern lit in both eyes. The girl, oh, your grace, the shame of it, fled in the night, bolted her door as usual, gone by morning through the scullery window, and the silver candlesticks gone with her before witnesses, the cook will swear to the empty sideboard. Ungrateful, unnatural creature after every mercy. No note, no direction. Girls of that sort make for the towns, do they not, or the ports? She did hope his grace would not trouble himself an hour over a thieving servant, with his great ball so near, and might they still expect the honor of? Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, at the smooth, solicitous, lying face, and understood that she believed she had won. The girl was broken loose from every protection, nameless on the roads with a false crime pinned to her, and no magistrate would blink at it, and nothing tied Agnes to anything, and in her mind the danger was walking east in the rain, getting smaller every hour. "Madam," he said, "I look forward to seeing your family at the ball." And he bowed and left her standing in her stolen morning room satisfied, and that satisfaction was the only weapon he left her holding, and he did it deliberately. Let her feel safe. Safe things stand still. Then he rode east, and the hunt began, and it broke his heart one village at a time. The trouble was simple and brutal. He was hunting a girl no one had reason to remember. A servant girl walking in rain keeps her head down and her cloth-wrapped head covered and speaks to no one and buys nothing. At the first toll gate, nothing. At the crossroads inn, nothing. And where there was something, it was worse than nothing, because Agnes's letters had run ahead of him faster than any horse. Twice he heard his quarry described back to him in words he recognized as dictated. A shaved-headed thief, dangerous, plausible, sent packing from a good house. Watch your spoons if she begs at your door. A carter at Long Ditton had seen a girl matching that answer turned away from the kitchen of the Bell with stones, thrown words at least, if not stones, and had not seen which road she took after. At Marsh Priory on the second day, he found the Green Man, and Mrs. Pettibone, who looked the mud-splashed Duke up and down with her arms folded, and gave him the first honest account in 40 miles, and it came with a bill of judgment attached. She was here, 2 nights. Best worker I ever had through that door, and quiet, and thanked me for soup like it was a feast. Then yesterday morning a fine letter reaches the vicar's wife about a thieving bald-pate girl loose in the district, and by noon 3 of my regulars won't drink while she's in my kitchen, and what am I to do? I've a living to make. The woman's jaw worked. I'm not proud of it. I gave her bread and a shilling and my man's old cap, and she never said one word of complaint, and that's what shamed me worst. She asked the road to Kingsbridge. The hiring office their ships workers north to the mills, them as have no characters. They take anyone. She looked at him hard. They take anyone because it's half a prison, the mills, and them that go on the agency ships don't come back. If you mean that girl, well, sir, ride. He rode. He nearly killed the horse doing it. Kingsbridge at dusk on the second day, the harbor smell, the hiring office over a chandlery, a clerk who ran his finger down a greasy ledger by lamplight while Nathaniel's grooms held the horses in the street. Shaved head, burned hand. The finger stopped. Signed articles yesterday, domestic and mill intake passage north on the Providence. The clerk squinted up. You her family, bit late. Providence loads tonight and sails on the dawn tide. Which berth? Harbor steps, East Quay, but here. The clerk was talking to an empty doorway. The East Quay at night was chaos. Lanterns and cargo and a dark hull swallowing a line of boxes and people. And Nathaniel went down the line of huddled passengers at the rope like a man possessed. Lantern borrowed from a stevedore, looking into face after face after face. Old women, thin children, a one-armed soldier and no Clara. And at the head of the gangway a mate with a manifest board barred his way. Sinclair, Nathaniel said. A young woman, Clara Sinclair, or she may have given no surname, signed yesterday for the mills. The mate ran his light down the board and turned it so the Duke could see, and there it was, an entry, and through it a single line of ink struck out. She was signed. Came to the steps this evening and gave her place up. Give it up, mark you, paid passage, and them tickets is like gold to these poor devils. He shrugged. Widow woman further down the line had a sick lad and no passage money, and your girl walks up cool as church and puts her ticket in the woman's hand and walks off the quay. Never seen the like. Walks off where? Nathaniel heard his own voice from a distance. Which way? Did she say anything at all? The mate scratched his beard. Said something to the widow as she went. Didn't catch the whole of it. He turned back to his manifest, already losing interest, and delivered the only clue in the world in the voice of a man reporting the weather. Something about going to say goodbye to her mother first, while she still could. Her mother was 17 years dead, and Nathaniel stood on the East Quay with the lantern burning down. In the one town in England, he was certain contained no grave of Rosalind Sinclair, and had no earthly idea what it meant. Going to say goodbye to her mother first, while she still could. Nathaniel turned the sentence over 100 times on the black ride home from Kingsbridge, and by the time the lights of Ashford Hall rose out of the dark, he had wrung one certainty from it. You do not say goodbye to a memory, you say goodbye to a place, a grave, Rosalind's grave. And it was not at Thornfield. That was the second certainty, and it had taken him longer, and it had come to him with a fresh spike of anger. Clara had turned away from a paid passage north, and she had not turned toward home. Of course she had not. Agnes had made home a hangman's trap for her, 10 miles of parish crawling with a candlestick lie. Which meant the mother lay buried somewhere else, somewhere a daughter could reach on foot, with a shilling and a heel of bread, somewhere outside the reach of Agnes's letters. But where? He had read Rosalind's letter until he knew it like a psalm, and it named no village, no churchyard, nothing. Edmund Sinclair of Thornfield, that was all. He rode through his own gates at 2 in the morning with the answer no closer, and the great house blazing with light even at that hour, because it was now the day before the grand ball, and 30 guests' worth of preparation had rolled on without him like a tide. He had been half mad enough to consider canceling the ball outright, and had discarded the idea before it finished forming, and not for propriety's sake. Because the ball was no longer a ball. The ball was a net, and every fish he wanted was already swimming toward it. His steward met him in the hall with a list of the day's arrivals, and the 2 names Nathaniel needed leapt off the paper. First, Mr. Josiah Pettifer the younger of Pettifer and Sons, Gray's Inn, come up from London by the mail in answer to a midnight rider, carrying a locked document case that he had declined to let the footmen touch. And second, confirmed by note that very evening, with gushing thanks for his Grace's most particular kindness in sending his own carriage, Mrs. Agnes Thornfield and Miss Beatrice Thornfield, who would be honored, delighted, overjoyed to attend the grand ball of the season. His own carriage. Nathaniel had ordered that touch from the road, and he intended it exactly as Agnes would read it. The county read it the same way within hours. A duke does not send his private carriage for a family of middling gentry unless an announcement is coming, and by suppertime the whole house believed what Beatrice believed, what Agnes believed, that the fortnight's cold, unreadable host had made his choice at last, and that golden-haired Beatrice Thornfield would be a duchess by Michaelmas. Let them believe it. Safe things stand still. Flattered things preen and dress carefully and walk smiling through the front doors of the trap. Mr. Pettifer was waiting in the study, a dry, precise young man with his father's spectacles and, blessedly, his father's files. What he drew from the locked case and laid upon the desk beside the chest's copy made Nathaniel close his eyes briefly. The original will of Edmund Sinclair, executed in duplicate at Gray's Inn, witnessed, sealed, dated. Sole heiress Clara. And beneath it, in the firm's tidy records, correspondence. 3 letters from Edmund Sinclair in his last year, and then, 5 weeks after his death, a letter over the signature of Agnes Sinclair, now Thornfield's mistress, regretting to inform the firm that her late husband had revoked the London will on his deathbed before local witnesses, that a newer testament had been proved in the county court, and that the firm's services were no longer required. We wrote twice for particulars of the revocation, Pettifer said. We received no answer, and the lady was under no obligation to provide one, and there our file ends. My father marked it irregular. He straightened his spectacles. Your Grace, if the county probate rests on the document I am given to understand it rests on, with the witnesses I am given to understand witnessed it, then what we have here is not irregular. It is felony. Forgery of a testament uttering and the systematic conversion of the heiress's estate. Upon such evidence, and upon the young lady being produced alive and identified, everything Mrs. Thornfield holds is forfeit, and the lady herself is very likely for the assizes. He paused, dry as his files. Producing the young lady alive being, I take it, the present difficulty. The present difficulty, Nathaniel agreed, and heard the key mate's voice again, goodbye to her mother, and made himself say it aloud, the whole tangle, the letter with no place names in it. A physician's daughter from nowhere. A grave that could be in any churchyard in England. And Mrs. Hodge, sitting forgotten in the corner with her mending untouched on her lap, because she had refused to go to bed until she knew what came next, lifted her head slowly and said, in the voice of a woman reaching back 40 years, "Ashenden." Both men turned. Ashenden St. Mary. The old housekeeper's eyes had gone distant and wet, and something almost like a smile touched them. Dr. Fairweather's village, her father's. She used to talk of it summers when we were girls together below stairs and above. The crooked spire, she said, and the walnut tree in the churchyard her grandfather planted, and how her father set every broken bone for 12 miles and died owed £40 he never once asked for. She said, and here the housekeeper's voice wavered and held, she said to me once, "Margaret, when I die, I don't want to lie anywhere grand. Put me under the walnut tree with Papa, where the nuts come down in October and the children come scrumping for them, and there will always be laughing in the churchyard." She looked up at the Duke. "If Edmund Sinclair loved her the way that letter says he loved her, Your Grace, then that is where he put her. Ashenden St. Mary. It lies south of Kingsbridge, along the coast lane, 12 miles, perhaps 14. 12 miles from the harbor steps where a girl with a shilling had walked off into the dark, going the one place in the world left to her." Nathaniel was already moving. "Pettifer, you have full authority in my absence. Tomorrow evening the ball proceeds. If I am not returned by 10, you will find my written instructions with my steward, and you will open them, and you will do everything in them to the letter in front of everyone." He was through the study door. "Margaret, pray." He took the coast road through what remained of the night and the whole of the grey morning, changing horses at Kingsbridge, asking at every turning, and the lane ran him along cliff tops and down through fishing hamlets, and the day before the ball burned away behind him mile by mile, and it was late golden afternoon when he came at last around a fold of hills and saw it below him, a huddle of cottages, a stream, and a squat stone church with a spire that leaned like an old man listening. Ashenden St. Mary. He left the blown horse at the lychgate and went into the churchyard on foot, hat in hand, and found the walnut tree at once, huge and green and older than any grave beneath it, and under its shade a modest stone, clean of moss where every neighbor stone was furred with it, tended, and he read the names with his heart slamming. Rosalind Sinclair, beloved wife and mother, and beneath, older, Dr. Jonas Fairweather of this parish. And laid against the base of the stone, so fresh they had not yet wilted, blue field scabious and white campion, tied with a strip of grey wool torn from the hem of a dress. She had been here within hours. The churchyard held its breath around him, gold and green and utterly empty, and Nathaniel Ashford turned in a slow circle beneath the walnut tree, past leaning stones and the crooked spire and a sexton's shed and the black yew by the wall, and the tightness in his chest turned over into something like prayer. "Clara," he called into the evening, "Clara Sinclair." A wood pigeon clattered up out of the walnut leaves. Nothing else moved at all. The pigeon clattered away over the cottage roofs, and silence came back down over the churchyard, and Nathaniel stood beneath the walnut tree, feeling the whole desperate ride collapse under him. Hours. He had missed her by hours, perhaps less, and the world was wide, and a girl who did not wish to be found. "You should not shout in a churchyard." The voice came from behind the black yew by the wall, and it was quiet and rough at the edges from days of weather and silence, and he would have known it among 10,000 voices. She stepped out from the shadow of the tree into the last of the gold light, and she looked, he thought, like the end of a long war. A man's old cap over her shorn head, the gray dress stained to the knee with road mud, one hem torn where the wool had gone to tie flowers, the bandage on her hand gray and unraveling. She stood with her back straight and her chin level and her eyes wary, a creature that had learned exactly what the world did when you let it close. And she watched the Duke of Ashford across her mother's grave and did not curtsy. "I heard the horse," she said. "I thought it was someone come from her." Her eyes went over his mud-crusted boots, his ruined coat, the 2 days of beard. "You look worse than I do, Your Grace." The laugh broke out of him before he knew it was coming, one short, cracked syllable and something in it. The exhaustion of it, the humanness of it, made the wariness in her eyes flicker. "I have been to Thornfield," he said, "and to Long Ditton and Marsh Priory and the hiring office at Kingsbridge and the East Quay, where a mate on the Providence showed me your name with a line of ink through it." He came no closer. Some instinct told him that a single step toward her now would be one step too many, so he stood where he was across the grave and did the only thing left. He told her the truth, all of it, standing up plainly, the way you lay stones. "Your mother's name was Rosalind Fairweather. She was born in this village in the physician's house. When she was 17, she went to school and met a quiet, dark girl called Catherine, and they loved each other like sisters for the rest of their lives. Catherine became my mother." He watched Clara go very still. "Rosalind spent her summers at Ashford Hall. She sang in the corridors. There is a portrait of the two of them in my gallery, holding hands, that my mother paid for in secret, and the summer after it was painted, my grandfather and my father accused your mother of stealing emeralds that never left my grandfather's strongbox and drove her from the house, because she was a nobody who had made herself too dear. You stood in front of that portrait at 1:30 in the morning and told me you had never seen her before in your life." He said it without accusation. "It was the wisest lie you ever told. If your stepmother had learned what you had seen, I think you would never have reached the mill ship at all." Clara had not moved. Her eyes had gone wide and fixed, and her bandaged hand had risen slowly to press against the hem of her dress, against something hidden there, and she did not seem to know she was doing it. He told the rest. The deathbed letter, the chest, the key in the sewing box, 16 years. He took his mother's letters words and gave them to her across the grave in the fading light. Sisters choose each other, and when he came to Rosalind's letter, to "She is the best of all of us, and her name is Clara," the girl made a small sound, one only, and pressed the back of her wrist hard against her mouth, and her eyes never left his face. "And this is the last of it," he said, "and it is the part you must hear standing up, so brace yourself. Your father made his true will in London at your mother's urging, because she had watched Agnes count the spoons. That will names you sole heiress of Thornfield. The house you scrubbed floors in is your house, Clara. The room they moved you out of is your room. Every gown on your stepsister's back was bought with your money. The will Agnes rules by is a forgery. The London original lies on my study desk tonight beside your mother's letter, with a lawyer guarding both. And what your stepmother did to you these 3 years has a name in law, and the name is felony." He drew a breath. "She shaved your head because you are your mother's living portrait, and I was coming into the county looking for exactly that portrait, and she knew it. The spoon was nothing. The punishment was nothing. She was erasing you, and she nearly succeeded. And the reason she nearly succeeded is that I stood in a parlor with you 3 feet from me and let her take you, because I wanted to be careful. I have been ashamed of many things in my life. Nothing like that." The light was almost gone now. Somewhere down in the village a dog barked twice and gave up. Clara stood at her mother's stone with the tears running freely down her face at last, not sobbing, just streaming, the way rain comes off a roof, 3 years of it, and when she finally spoke, her voice was wrecked and steady. "I have a picture of her," she said, "sewn in my hem. I took it the night of Papa's funeral before Agnes could sell it. I have carried her for 3 years and I could not even remember her voice." She looked down at the grave, at the flowers tied with gray wool. "I came to tell her I was sorry, that I had lost everything she left me and I was going away where no one would ever know either of us had lived." She looked up. "And instead you rode out of the dark looking like a drowned highwayman, to tell me, My mother has been waiting 16 years to win." "The truth kept its appointment," Nathaniel said. "Her words, 'It is only sometimes late.'" And then, because it could no longer be helped, he walked around the grave and took off his ruined coat and put it around her shoulders. And Clara Sinclair, heiress of Thornfield, stood under her grandfather's walnut tree in a duke's coat and her dead landlady's husband's cap, and wept properly at last. And the crooked spire leaned over the both of them like an old man listening and approving. They stayed that night at the Ashenden Inn in 2 rooms, with the innkeeper's wife fussing over Clara's hand, and over bread and mutton by the fire he laid out the last of it. The ball. Tomorrow evening. Pettifer, the documents, the instructions with the steward. Agnes and Beatrice walking smiling through the front doors believing a betrothal was coming. "You owe them nothing," he finished, "least of all a performance. Pettifer can do the whole of it by law coldly, and you need never look at either of them again. But your mother was called a thief in a great house before the whole company and walked out with her head high, and so were you." He turned his cup slowly on the table. "If you want your hour, Clara, I will give you the ballroom." Clara looked into the fire for a long time. When she turned back, there was something in her face he had never seen there before, and it had a little of the portrait's laugh in it, way down deep, banked like a coal. "They made me sit on a kitchen chair," she said, "and burned my hair in the stove while my stepsister laughed. I will take the ballroom, your grace." The grand ball of Ashford Hall began at 9, and by 10 it was, the county agreed, the finest evening anyone could remember. The state rooms blazed. The fortnight's 30 families had swollen to 300 guests, and at the center of everything, radiant, triumphant, stood Beatrice Thornfield in white silk and seed pearls, Clara's seed pearls, receiving congratulations that had not yet been earned with a graciousness that conceded they very soon would be. Agnes wore wine-dark satin and moved through the rooms like a queen regent. His Grace, guests were told, had been detained by a state business and would join his ball late. His Grace's carriage had been sent for the Thornfield ladies. Everyone understood what everyone understood. At 10:30 the music stopped. It stopped mid-phrase at a signal from the steward, and 300 people turned toward the great doors, expecting their host, and their host came, and the whispering began at the doorway and rolled down the ballroom like a wave. Because the Duke of Ashford entered with a woman on his arm, and it was not Beatrice Thornfield. She wore a gown of deep green silk, simple to severity beside the room's froth, made overnight by 3 sworn-to-secrecy seamstresses out of a bolt meant for curtains, and she wore no jewels at all but a gold and pearl brooch at her collar, a ring of small pearls around a painted forget-me-not. And on her head, framing a pale, still, level-eyed face, she wore a bonnet of ivory lace, close-fitted and fine, the kind a lady might wear to her own wedding breakfast, and utterly, deliberately wrong for a ball. Agnes Thornfield stood 20 feet inside the doors, and Clara watched the recognition strike her stepmother in stages, the face first puzzled, then arrested, then, as the brooch registered, as the whole picture registered, draining white to the lips, the wine glass tilting forgotten in her hand. Beatrice simply stared, uncomprehending, at the kitchen girl in silk on the arm of her duke. Nathaniel led Clara to the center of the floor, into the emptied circle where the dancing had been, and his voice, when he spoke, was pitched to carry to the last man in the last doorway, and it carried. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen, before there is dancing there is a debt to pay, and it is 30 years overdue, and it will be paid in public because the wrong was done in public." He paused. 30 years ago in this house, before a company such as this one, a young woman was falsely accused of theft by my own family and cast out so that certain people could be rid of her. Her name was Rosalind. Some few here may remember. She was innocent. The proof has lain in my grandfather's strongbox and in my mother's chest through all the years since, and tonight it lies on the table in my library, where any person present may examine it, besides certain other documents which Mr. Pettifer of Gray's Inn will be delighted to explain." His eyes found Agnes across the circle and rested there, pleasantly, terribly. History, they say, repeats itself. 1 month ago, the daughter of that same Rosalind was accused of theft by persons who had excellent reasons to make her disappear. Her head was shaved to hide who she is, for she is her mother over again, and there are those who could not afford to have her recognized. She was slandered in every parish within a day's ride. She was driven onto the roads in the rain. And she is the sole and rightful heiress of the estate of Thornfield, as her father's true will provides, and every person who has spent her inheritance these 3 years will answer for it at law. The ballroom had gone so silent that the candles could be heard. "I asked her," Nathaniel said, "to let this be done quietly. She chose to stand where her mother stood, and so—" He turned to Clara. And there it was at last, the moment the county would tell and retell for 50 years, in drawing rooms and kitchens and to grandchildren by firesides. The Duke of Ashford faced the unknown woman in green, in the dead center of his own blazing ballroom, before 300 witnesses, and his hand rose to her bonnet as everyone watched. He did not pull it away. That was the detail every telling kept. He untied the ivory ribbon beneath her chin slowly, with a kind of ceremony, the way a man uncovers his head in church, and he lifted the lace away, and Clara Sinclair stood in the candlelight of the great chandeliers with her shorn head bare before them all, the copper stubble catching the light like a crown of new fire, her chin high, her mother's eyes steady on the room. "Look at her," the Duke said quietly, and quiet as it was, it reached the walls. "This is what they tried to erase. Look well." For one heartbeat, nothing. Then from the side of the room, alone, an old housekeeper in her best black began to applaud, weeping openly, and a 6-year-old boy beside her joined in furiously. And then the baronet whose arms Beatrice had once fainted into, and then a wave of it, rolling, swelling, until the chandeliers rang. And somewhere under that thunder Agnes Thornfield's wine glass reached the floor at last, and no one heard it break. They did not run. That, too, the county remembered with relish. There was nowhere to run to. Agnes stood through the applause like a woman standing through her own hanging, and when it ended, Mr. Pettifer of Gray's Inn appeared at her elbow, dry and courteous, with 2 quiet men behind him, and invited her to step into the library, and she went, because the alternative was to be carried. Beatrice trailed after in her stolen pearls, sobbing prettily to a room that had, in the space of 5 minutes, entirely stopped looking at her. What passed in the library was law and took months to finish, and the short of it was this: the forged will exposed, the estate restored, Agnes escaping the assizes only by signing away every claim, every possession, and every right to set foot in the county again, and departing with Beatrice for a small, cold town in the far north where nobody knew them, to live narrow on the charity of a cousin who counted the spoons. But that was months away. That night in the ballroom, when the doors had closed on the wreckage, the music started again, and the Duke of Ashford turned to the heiress of Thornfield and asked, before the entire county, for the honor of the first dance. "I have not danced in 3 years," Clara said. "I shall tread on you, your grace." "My name," he said, "is Nathaniel, and you carried a child through a burning kitchen. I will risk my feet." Weeks later, on a bright October morning, under the walnut tree at Ashenden St. Mary, with the nuts coming down and the village children scrumping for them along the wall, exactly as her mother had wanted, laughter in the churchyard, Nathaniel Ashford knelt on the grass beside Rosalind Stone and opened a small box. Inside, no diamond. A ring of small pearls made to match a brooch, around a forget-me-not worked in gold. "I asked your mother's permission first," he said. "It seemed proper. She raised no objection." And Clara Sinclair, her hair grown to a soft copper cap that turned to fire in the autumn sun, laughed at last the way the girl in the portrait laughs, said yes beneath her grandfather's tree, and heard, in the October wind moving through the walnut leaves, something very like two old friends somewhere, choosing each other still. 2 springs later, the rose garden at Ashford Hall had been replanted. It had stood half-wild for 30 years, because the late Duke had ordered it dug up once long ago, and the gardeners of that day had quietly disobeyed him, letting it tangle and hide instead, the way old servants protect the things their masters try to kill. Now it bloomed again in its old shape, bed for bed, from a watercolor plan found pressed inside one of the late Duchess's books, painted in a swift, warm, imperfect hand and signed with a single R. On a bright May morning, 2 springs after the famous ball, the Duchess of Ashford sat on the stone bench at the heart of that garden, with a sleeping baby against her shoulder. The baby was 5 months old, and her name was Rose Catherine Ashford, and the fine down on her small head had come in, to the delight of the entire county and the total lack of surprise of one old housekeeper, a bright, unmistakable copper red. Clara's own hair fell past her shoulders now. She still touched it sometimes without thinking at her collarbone, where the weight of it began, the way you touch a healed place. Her mother's brooch was at her collar, as it was every day. And in the gallery of the great house, the portrait of the 2 laughing girls on this very bench had been cleaned and rehung in the place of honor at the center of the wall, with a new brass plate on which both names stood complete at last, and beside it hung a newer portrait, finished that winter. Nathaniel standing, Clara seated with Rose in her arms, and behind them, at Clara's insistence and over her furious blushing protests, Mrs. Margaret Hodge in her best black, because, as the Duchess had informed the painter, family portraits should contain the family. Little Tom, 8 now and grown bold as brass, took lessons with the vicar and told every visiting child, with immense authority, the story of how the Duchess had carried him through actual fire. Thornfield had not been sold, though buyers had come sniffing. Clara had done something else with her father's house. The county had raised its eyebrows at first, and then, because the fashion of an opinion follows a duchess like a hem follows a gown, had decided it was the noblest thing it had ever heard of. Thornfield's rooms were full again of girls. Orphaned girls, cast-off girls, girls dismissed without a character, girls with nowhere to go, the girls the workhouse waited for. They learned letters and figures there and a proper trade, and each one left with a testimonial signed by the Duchess of Ashford herself, which no housekeeper in 6 counties dared question. Over the door of what had once been Agnes's morning room, a small painted board read, "No one here is nobody." Clara went there every month, and always, before she left, she stood a moment in the kitchen, by the spot where a certain chair had once been held down against the flagstones. The chair itself was long gone. She had burned it in the yard, the first week, with her own hands, and the girls of Thornfield School had stood around the fire and cheered without quite knowing why. Of Agnes and Beatrice there was little news, and Clara had stopped listening for it. A letter had come once in the first year from the cold northern town in Beatrice's hand, hinting at hardship and sisterhood and small loans. Clara had read it twice, sat with it a long evening, and then sent by return of post not money, but a plainly worded offer of a paid place at Thornfield School, board, training, and a testimonial to be earned like every other girl's. No answer had ever come. Nathaniel thought the offer more cutting than any refusal could have been. Clara had not meant it to cut. That was, perhaps, the most cutting thing of all. Footsteps on the gravel now, and Rose stirred against her shoulder, and Clara looked up as Nathaniel came down the rose walk with his coat over his arm and October's promise already in the green of the trees. And with him, moving slower these days but refusing all assistance, came Mrs. Hodge, carrying, as she insisted on carrying every fine morning, the baby's son Bonnet. It was a tiny thing of white lace, and it was the one piece of the child's wardrobe the Duchess had sewn entirely with her own hands, and there was a joke inside it that only 3 people in the world fully understood. "She will not keep it on, Your Grace," Mrs. Hodge reported with deep satisfaction as she reached the bench. "3rd time this week, pulled it straight off in the nursery and laughed like a heathen." "Of course she did," said the Duke, and bent to kiss his wife, and then his daughter's small blazing head. "She is her mother's daughter. In this family, we decide for ourselves when the bonnet comes off." Clara laughed, the portrait's laugh, loose and bright over the roses, and the baby woke and joined in on principle, and the old housekeeper pretended to be scandalized and failed completely. And if, in the warm hush that followed, the leaves along the rose walk moved without any wind, and the bench seemed for a moment pleasantly crowded, as though 2 old friends had settled in on either side of the little family to admire the baby, well, it was that kind of garden. It had always been that kind of garden. They had shaved her head to make her no one. Instead, they had shown the whole world exactly who she was. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.